Here we are again, in the still space of the night, and outside, it's raining. Do you hear it? The sound of rain. For many, it is the sound of peace. A perfect soundtrack to curl up in a warm blanket, read a book, or simply drift into a deep sleep. The rain washes away the city's dust, quenches the thirst of the plants. Water is the origin of life. We are born from water. Our bodies are more than 70% water. Water is nature's lullaby, but tonight, I want you to listen to the rain with a different set of ears. Try to listen more closely. Within that steady rhythm, there is a hidden power, a tireless persistence. Drop by drop, it is accumulating. It can seep into the smallest cracks, can erode even the most solid rocks. And when it comes together as one, it can become an unstoppable force. Water is also a symbol of destruction, a cold, emotionless fury that can wash away everything we built, everything we love. In just a moment, humanity's relationship with water, since the dawn of time, has always been a relationship of both love and fear. We build our greatest civilizations along rivers, but we also build the levees to protect ourselves from those same rivers. Water is also the flow of memory. A river carries silt, and it also carries stories. It witnesses the rise and fall of empires. It listens to the vows and the songs of countless generations. The river's memory is long and deep. It never forgets. Tonight, we will journey upstream through that memory. We will tell a story of the greatest, most catastrophic flood in modern American history, a disaster that reshaped not only the geography, but the very soul of a nation, a story of human hubris, of nature's wrath, and of tears that became immortal in music. Our story does not begin with a hurricane. It begins with a seemingly endless rain. Let's go back to the summer of 1926. Across the Great Plains of America, from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachians, it began to rain, not the fleeting summer showers, but a dreary, gray, persistent rain, lasting from one day to the next, 1 week to the next. The sky was like a giant lead blanket, wringing out every last drop of moisture onto a land that was becoming more and more saturated. It was said that farmers had to plant their rice 3 times, because the first 2 times the seeds had rotted in the mud. Children forgot what the sun looked like. The dampness seeped into every piece of wood, every piece of fabric, even into people's dreams. That rain lasted through the autumn, and then into the winter. Snow fell with unusual thickness, and then the spring of 1927 arrived, bringing with it warmer rains that melted the thick snow, pouring trillions more gallons of water into a river basin that could no longer absorb another drop. Every creek became a river, every river became a monster, and all those monsters flowed to one place, the Mississippi River, the father of waters. This great river, the heart of America, began to swell menacingly. The water level rose to unprecedented heights. It was no longer a river. It was a giant water serpent, coiling itself, ready to devour everything in its path. To fight this monster, humans had built a great defense system, a wall of earth stretching for thousands of miles along both banks. The levees, the engineering philosophy of the time, was simple, and also very arrogant. Levees only. The engineers of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers believed they could subdue the river. They believed that if they built the levees high enough, strong enough, they could force the water to obey human will, to flow straight out into the Gulf of Mexico. They had cut the river off from its natural floodplains, the lands that were nature's own safety valve. They had locked the monster in an earthen cage, and in the spring of 1927, that monster decided it would no longer be imprisoned. April 1927, the pressure on the levees became unbearable. News of small levee breaches began to appear everywhere, but those were just the opening acts. The main act of the tragedy took place on April 21st, at a place called Mounds Landing, Mississippi. Imagine a giant wall of earth, as tall as a 3-story building. Behind it were thousands of acres of farmland, homes, communities holding their breath and praying. In front of it was a sea of reddish-brown, furious water, the level already a meter higher than the top of the levee. Hundreds of men, mostly African-American sharecroppers, had been forced to work on that slippery levee. They had no modern machinery. They only had shovels and sandbags. They worked in the rain, in desperation, trying to add every inch of earth, every sandbag, to a levee that was groaning under the water's pressure. They were soldiers in a battle they knew they were destined to lose. And then, around 8 o'clock in the morning, the levee began to sweat. Water started to seep through its body, forming small streams. It was the sign of collapse. A growl emanated from deep within the earth, and then a roar erupted, not the roar of gunpowder, but the roar of millions of tons of earth being torn asunder. The Mounds Landing levee had broken. Survivors recounted that the sound was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was like the sound of a freight train approaching at full speed. A roar that ripped through the air. A wall of water, more than 6 meters high, carrying mud, trees, and animal carcasses, crashed down upon the delta. The volume of water that poured through that breach was double the volume of Niagara Falls. It submerged everything. In just one day, a vast expanse of land had turned into an inland ocean. Water covered an area of nearly 70,000 square kilometers, equivalent to the size of a country like Ireland. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes in a single night. That was the wrath of nature, but the true human tragedy had only just begun. In that chaos, the harsh social hierarchy of the American South revealed its most cruel face. Thousands of black citizens were not just victims of the water, they were also victims of the white landowners. They were herded onto the tops of the remaining levees, which became giant refugee camps. Without enough food, water, or medicine, they were forbidden from leaving, because the plantation owners feared they would lose their cheap labor force after the water receded. They were treated like animals, imprisoned by both the water and the guns of the patrols. That pain was too great, that injustice too deep, to be recorded only in newspaper pages. It needed another medium of expression, a medium that could contain both the suffering and the pride, and it was found in music. From the very land submerged by the flood in the Mississippi Delta, a new musical genre rose more powerfully than ever before. The Delta Blues. It was the voice of those who had lost everything. In 1929, Memphis Minnie and Kansas Joe McCoy recorded a song called When the Levee Breaks. The lyrics are simple but haunting. If it keeps on raining, levees going to break. If it keeps on raining, levees going to break, and all these people have no place to stay. Or as the queen of the blues, Bessie Smith, sang in Backwater Blues about her experience of being trapped in the flood. When it rains 5 days and the skies turn dark as night. When it rains 5 days and the skies turn dark as night. There's trouble taking place in the lowlands at night. These songs are not just music. They are historical documents. They are the echo of a tragedy, an indelible testimony of a flood that washed away not just homes, but also the illusion of human control. The Great Flood of 1927 changed America forever. Technically, it utterly destroyed the levee's only philosophy. The lesson in humility was written in water and mud, but that was the lesson on paper. In the documents of Congress. What about in our minds? The river's memory is very long, it remembers everything. But what about human memory? I wonder, and perhaps you're wondering too, do we truly learn from the painful sediments of history? Or deep down, do you also have this uneasy feeling? Just like me, the feeling that we simply build our levees higher, our walls stronger, on a foundation of forgetfulness, that we are lulling ourselves to sleep with our great structures, only to be surprised one day by the power of the very flow we tried to ignore. It's not an easy question to answer, and I truly want to hear your reflections in the comments. A like would be a signal that you are still awake and pondering with me. And if you don't want to miss the next chapter of this story, please subscribe to continue this journey with us, because the 1927 flood taught America a lesson, and in response, they decided to build bigger, taller walls to declare war on the very giants they called rivers. In the next part, we will explore that battle. Wrestling with giants. In the last part, we were immersed in the watery memory of the great Mississippi flood of 1927. We saw a nation brought to its knees. We heard the cries of lament in the immortal blues. America had to face a harsh truth. They were not the masters of nature. They were merely guests in a land shaped by great flows. That flood taught them a lesson, but the lesson they learned, perhaps, was not humility. It was determination. In the consciousness of a young nation, pulsating with industrial ambition, being subdued by a river was a humiliation, and their response was not to learn to coexist, but to stand up and declare war. A vow was made upon the water, never again, and to fulfill that vow, they summoned an army that did not carry rifles and cannons. Their weapons were rulers, blueprints, bulldozers, and millions of tons of concrete. It was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Before 1927, they were just a technical agency with a relatively limited role. But after the disaster, the U.S. Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1928, granting them a power and a mission that was almost godlike, to subdue the Mississippi River and all its tributaries. The levees only philosophy had drowned in the flood. Now, a new, more ambitious philosophy was born. It was not just about building higher levees. It was about building a comprehensive control system, a system of concrete and steel chains to bind the giant named Mississippi. And so, one of the greatest and most expensive civil engineering projects in human history began. For decades, thousands of workers toiled tirelessly. They weren't building pyramids for pharaohs. They were building ramparts for an industrial nation. They moved a volume of earth 3 times greater than that moved to build the Panama Canal. Imagine these structures. Imagine the Bonnet Carré Spillway in Louisiana, a giant safety valve for the city of New Orleans. When the Mississippi's water level rises too high, engineers use giant cranes to lift massive timbers from the concrete piers, allowing a portion of the river to flow directly into Lake Pontchartrain and then out to the Gulf of Mexico. It is a deliberate act, sacrificing one piece of land to save a city, a calculated sacrifice. Imagine the old river control structure. Also in Louisiana, this is perhaps the most important, yet least known, structure in America. The Mississippi River, historically, has always tended to change its course, to follow a shorter path to the sea via the Atchafalaya River. If that were to happen, the cities of New Orleans and Baton Rouge would lose their freshwater source, and the entire economy of the Delta would collapse. The old river control structure was built with a single purpose, to keep the Mississippi River from escaping. It is a stopper, a safety pin, a silent but intense battle waged every day between human will and nature's will. And of course, the levees. Thousands of miles of levees were rebuilt, higher, wider, stronger, for more than half a century. This system seemed to work perfectly. The Mississippi River, for the first time in history, seemed to have been tamed. It flowed obediently within the cage that man had created. And behind those ramparts, an illusion began to blossom, an illusion of absolute safety. Cities like New Orleans grew and expanded. People built houses, schools, and hospitals on land that was once swamp, land that should have been given to the river. Generations were born and raised without ever seeing a major flood. They believed in the walls of earth and concrete. They forgot they were living in a bowl, a land lower than sea level. They forgot the giant was still right next to them, separated only by a layer of chains. And this is the greatest paradox of trying to control nature. When you force a river into a narrow channel with levees, you do two things. First, you make the flow faster and more powerful. The water's energy, instead of being spread out over the natural floodplain, is concentrated, creating tremendous pressure on the levees themselves. Second, and more dangerously, you sever the vital connection between the river and its delta. For thousands of years, the Mississippi carried sediment and built up the Louisiana Delta. That sediment is what created this land. When the levees were built, that sediment was no longer deposited. It was carried straight out into the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The consequence, the delta began to sink. Every year, an area of Louisiana equivalent to a football field disappears below sea level. The marshlands and barrier islands, which were the natural defense against ocean storms, also gradually eroded and disappeared. By building ramparts against the river, man had inadvertently dismantled the natural ramparts against the sea. They had created a perfect trap for themselves. And in August 2005, that trap was sprung. A new monster appeared. Its name was Katrina. It wasn't a drizzling rain that lasted for months. It was a Category 5 hurricane, one of the strongest storms ever recorded, heading straight for the Gulf of Mexico. It brought with it waves tens of meters high and destructive winds. When Katrina made landfall, it pushed a huge amount of water from the ocean inland. The sea level rose, flooding Lake Pontchartrain, and then it attacked the New Orleans levee system from both sides, from the river and from the lake. The ramparts built to fight the giant Mississippi now had to face another enemy, the giant ocean, and they could not hold. Numerous levees broke, not because the water flowed over the top, but because their foundations were too weak. The water hollowed out the earth beneath them, and the entire giant concrete walls collapsed. Water from Lake Pontchartrain and the industrial canals poured into the city like a tsunami. 80% of New Orleans was submerged. The scenes of 1927 repeated themselves, but this time it was even more horrific. Not cotton fields, but crowded neighborhoods. Not farmhouses, but homes, hospitals, schools. Hundreds of thousands of people were trapped. People had to climb onto their roofs, waving their hands in desperation, waiting for rescue helicopters. The Superdome, which was supposed to be the shelter of last resort, became a symbol of chaos and suffering. The battle with the giant had ended in a total defeat. The multi-billion-dollar flood control system, built over half a century, had collapsed. Nearly 1,400 people were killed. Katrina became the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. And in that moment, we were all forced to face a bitter reminder. Our engineering hubris has its limits. That when we try to bind nature, sometimes we only create an even more furious monster. I can't help but wonder, and perhaps you do too, when we build these concrete walls, are we really protecting ourselves, or are we just building bigger prisons for ourselves, with even more terrible risks when they collapse? And is declaring war on nature really the only path, or is there another philosophy, another way that we've been missing all along? Between the pride of control and the wisdom of acceptance, which side do you find yourself leaning towards? This debate has no easy answers, and that's why I truly want to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like will let me know you're still listening. and a subscribe will be our promise for the next part of the story. The battle with the rivers has shown the limits of our great structures. But now, a new enemy, more invisible and unpredictable, is emerging from the sky itself. In the next part, we will talk about the fury of the skies. In the last part, we witnessed a battle that spanned a century, a battle between human will and the power of the rivers. We built giant levees, structures of concrete and steel, with an arrogant belief that we could subdue nature. And then, Hurricane Katrina came as a bitter reminder that the giants we try to chain can still awaken. That battle, whether won or lost, was at least a battle we could understand. Our enemy had a form. It was a river. We could measure it. We could see it rise. We could build walls to fight against it. But what happens when the enemy changes? What happens when the enemy is no longer a flow that can be predicted weeks in advance, but a fury that pours down from the sky in just a few hours, or even minutes? Tonight, we will talk about a new kind of flood, a 21st century kind of flood. It doesn't come from tamed rivers, but from the angry sky itself. And to understand it, we must return to Texas. Let's go to the Texas Hill Country, the land of wild beauty and contradictions. Limestone hills, deep canyons, and crystal clear winding rivers. It is a place people come to escape the noise of the city, to immerse themselves in nature. But that very beauty hides a deadly danger. The steep terrain, along with a thin layer of clay soil over hard rock, prevents the land from effectively absorbing rainwater. It's like a giant funnel. When a heavy rain falls, the water has nowhere to soak. It will all rush to one place, the riverbed, turning a gentle stream into a ferocious monster in an instant. This land is known by a warning-filled name, Flash Flood Alley. And on the 4th of July weekend, in 2025, that name proved to be tragically accurate. Imagine you are at Camp Mystic, a summer camp for girls on the banks of the Guadalupe River. It's a warm summer evening. The children might be sitting around a campfire, singing songs, telling ghost stories. Their laughter echoes in the air. They're completely unaware that, upstream, a water bomb is about to detonate. An extremely heavy rain, a rain that meteorologists would later call a 1-in-1,000-year event, poured down on the hill country. Water from all over rushed into the Guadalupe River, and the river began to rise. Not slowly, not day by day, but minute by minute. The Guardian's report records an unbelievable figure. The Guadalupe River rose 26 feet, nearly 8 meters, in just 45 minutes. Another source from NBC News notes it rose more than 20 feet in 90 minutes. Whatever the exact number, it describes an apocalyptic scenario. Imagine the water level rising more than half a foot every minute, a literal wall of water, carrying trees, rocks, and everything in its path, was rushing downstream in the darkness. Not a single warning siren sounded. Just a few months earlier, a bill named HB 13, aimed at establishing a statewide flood siren system, had been rejected by the Texas Senate due to cost concerns. A local official in Kerr County, where the tragedy occurred, admitted that warning systems had been considered but were rejected because taxpayers won't pay for it. A cost-saving decision had to be paid for with an immeasurable price. At Camp Mystic, they probably only had a few minutes, maybe even a few seconds of warning, when they heard the roar of the approaching water. But it was too late. The wall of water arrived, washing away everything. 27 girls and counselors were swallowed by the current. In total, at least 120 people were killed across 6 counties in that disaster. The flood in Texas was not an isolated event. It was just one chapter in a larger story unfolding across the United States. Within that same week, there were at least 3 other 1-in-1,000-year rain events in North Carolina, New Mexico, and Illinois. The sky seemed to be angry, and the question is, why? To decode that anger, we must look at the science. Scientists today no longer talk about unusual weather. They are talking about a new normal shaped by climate change, the physical mechanism behind it. In the words of climatologist Russ Schumacher, is relatively simple. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. Studies have shown that for every degree Fahrenheit the planet heats up, the atmosphere can hold about 3 to 4% more moisture. What does that mean? It means our atmosphere is becoming a giant sponge, increasingly capable of sucking more water from the oceans. And when conditions converge, that sponge is squeezed out, dumping a huge amount of water in a very short period of time. Sometimes, that moisture concentrates into narrow bands, thousands of kilometers long, like rivers in the sky. Scientists call them atmospheric rivers. When these rivers in the sky make landfall and hit hilly terrain, they're forced to rise, cool, and release all the water they carry. That is exactly what happened in Texas. But climate change is not the only culprit. It is merely the one loading the gun. The way we build our world is the one pulling the trigger. Think about our cities. They're concrete deserts. We have replaced fields and forests capable of absorbing water with impermeable surfaces, asphalt, concrete, rooftops. When a heavy rain falls, the water has nowhere to go. It cannot soak into the ground. It can only flow over the surface, rushing into sewage systems designed for the rains of the last century. When the sewage system is overloaded, our streets become rivers. The modern flood disaster is a symphony of many factors, an atmosphere supercharged by climate change, a naturally vulnerable terrain, and a man-made environment that exacerbates the problem. And so, we have spent a century building walls against the rivers. We have succeeded, to some extent, but in the process, it seems we have all ignored a new enemy, an enemy growing angrier right above our heads. That leaves me, and perhaps you as well, to face an unsettling question tonight. So what do we do now? When the battle has changed, how do you build a wall against the sky itself? If the very nature of rain is truly changing, if it no longer follows the rules we once knew, has everything we built for the past become completely useless for the future? Does that feeling of helplessness before the sky make you anxious? Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe to the channel will help us continue these important conversations. Because the story is not over yet, the flood on the ground will eventually recede. The mud will be cleaned up, but there is another flood, an invisible flood of finance, of injustice, and of the future of the survivors. That is just beginning. In the next part, we will talk about the price of wet land. In the last part, we witnessed the fury of the skies, the water bombs, the atmospheric rivers, and the horrific flash floods showed the new face of natural disasters in the 21st century. But every storm eventually passes. The rain will stop, the sky will clear, and the water, eventually, will recede. The rescue teams will go home, the news vans will leave, the headlines will be replaced by other stories. For the outside world, the story is over, but for those who remain, those who stand in the rubble of their own homes, that is only the beginning of another flood, an invisible flood, with no roar, but its devastation is far more lasting and profound. It is the flood of finance, of bureaucracy, and of psychological wounds that never heal. Tonight, we will talk about the true price of wet land. Imagine you are one of the survivors of the Texas flood. You return to the house you've lived in your whole life. The door is broken open. Everything inside is covered in a thick, brown, toxic mud. The smell of dampness, of decay, hits your nose. The family photo albums, priceless mementos, are now just a clump of stuck-together paper. The beloved faces blurred beyond recognition. Furniture is overturned. The drywall has softened like waterlogged bread. Everything you spend a lifetime building has been destroyed in a matter of hours. The initial shock passes, and a brutally practical question enters your mind. What now? And this is when you face a second shocking truth, a truth that millions of other Americans are also facing. You call your homeowner's insurance company, the company you paid premiums to every year, and they tell you a cold sentence: "We're sorry. Your policy does not cover damage from flooding." It is one of the biggest and most devastating misunderstandings in homeownership in America. Most standard homeowners insurance policies exclude flood damage. A flood, by the insurance industry's definition, is a risk too large, too unpredictable, and private companies have almost completely abandoned this market since the 1960s. So, where do you turn? Government aid. FEMA will come. They will provide some financial assistance. But that amount, as many have bitterly discovered, is just a drop in the ocean. It is designed to get you temporary housing, to repair the most basic things to make a home livable, not to rebuild your life. You are almost completely on your own, and you are not the only one. According to FEMA itself, only 4% of homeowners nationwide have a separate flood insurance policy. 4%, that means the other 96%, more than 9 out of 10 homeowners, are participating in a huge gamble with Mother Nature. They are betting their entire net worth that the water will never knock on their door. Why is there such a massive insurance gap? Part of it comes from complacency. Many people think, my house isn't near a river or the sea. I don't need flood insurance. That is a dangerous thought. As one expert said in the NPR article, everybody's in a flood zone. People at the top of a mountain are in a flood zone. They're just in a good flood zone. The extreme rains like those in Texas have proven that floods can happen anywhere, even in places never before considered high risk. But the main, deeper cause lies in a broken promise from the government itself. In 1968, to fill the void left by private companies, the U.S. government created the National Flood Insurance Program. Its goal was noble: to provide a financial safety net, an affordable insurance policy for all citizens. That was a promise that if you did everything right, followed the building codes, the government would be there to protect you when the worst happened. For decades, this program operated, but always in a fragile state. It was constantly in debt, having to borrow tens of billions of dollars from the Treasury to pay claims after major hurricanes like Katrina or Harvey. The reason was that the insurance rates were artificially subsidized, not reflecting the true risk. And a few years ago, FEMA decided things had to change. They introduced a new pricing system called Risk Rating 2.0. The goal was to make the prices fairer. Instead of being based on broad, outdated flood maps, premiums would now be calculated for each individual house, based on its value and the specific flood risk it faces. It sounds reasonable, but its consequence has been a financial earthquake. For homes in safe areas, premiums might go down, but for homes in high-risk areas, premiums have skyrocketed to unimaginable levels. The NPR article gave an example from Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, a low-lying area frequently threatened by storms. There, residents are facing average flood insurance premiums of more than $5,400 a year, an increase of over 500% from before. A retired insurance executive there said, "The guy with the $1 million house, he'll figure it out." the guy with a $150,000 house, a couple $100 extra a month, that's a life-changing increase. And this is where the financial flood reveals its deepest social injustice. The people hit hardest by these rate hikes are often not the wealthy owners of beach houses. They are working-class families, retirees, low-income communities of color, people whose history has pushed to live on cheaper land, which is also the lowest lying and most vulnerable land. The fair risk-based system, ironically, is punishing the most vulnerable. They are caught in a trap. They cannot afford the rising insurance premiums, but they also cannot sell their houses, because who would want to buy a house that cannot be insured? This leads us to an even more controversial concept, climate migration or managed retreat. It is a cold, bureaucratic term for a very painful idea when an area becomes too dangerous, too expensive to protect. The only logical option is to abandon it. The government would buy people's homes and relocate entire communities to a safer place. But who gets to make that decision? Which community will be wiped off the map? And where will the people go? They will lose not just their homes, but their history, their neighborhood bonds, the place they call home. Becoming a climate refugee in your own country, that is the invisible price of wet land, a price that cannot be calculated in dollars. It is the psychological trauma, the loss of identity, the constant anxiety whenever dark clouds gather. It is the scar on the soul of an entire community, a scar that will never truly heal. As the night deepens, and you sit here with me, perhaps your mind is also heavy. We have seen homes submerged, lives turned upside down, and an undeniable truth: the water does not treat everyone equally. That forces us to ask an incredibly uncomfortable question about the very society we are building. What should our social contract be? As these storms become more ferocious, I know what you're thinking, because I'm thinking it too. A part of us might believe in the cold logic of the market. Shouldn't each person be responsible for their own risk? If you choose to live in a low-lying area, that's your choice. It is a cold logic, but it has the appeal of simplicity and a certain kind of fairness. But then, another part of us speaks up, the voice of compassion. We see the image of a family that has lost everything, a retiree with nowhere left to go, and we ask ourselves, do we really want to live in a world where our answer to a neighbor in distress is, "That's your problem"? Or do we have a shared duty, a collective responsibility, to protect the most vulnerable, even if it means we all must share the cost? Between those two paths, where do you find yourself standing? Between the logic of the market and the call of the community? This debate isn't just happening in the halls of Congress, it's happening right now, in each of our minds. Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and a subscribe to the channel would be invaluable encouragement for us to continue exploring these difficult questions together. Because we have seen the economic and social price, but is there another way? A path that isn't abandonment or mountains of debt? In the final part, we will search for rays of hope, new ideas, and a different philosophy, not to fight against, but to live with the flow. In the last part, we stood in the rubble after the water receded. We witnessed a second flood, a flood of bankruptcy, of useless insurance policies, of social injustice, and of psychological wounds that never heal. The picture we painted seemed to be only gray, a future of ever stronger storms, ever more useless levees, and ever more vulnerable communities. It seems we are trapped in a war we cannot win, but is that really the case? Is confrontation the only path? Tonight, in the final part of our journey, I want to invite you to find another way, a path not built with the concrete of resistance, but woven with the wisdom of adaptation, a philosophy not of fighting the flood, but of living with the flood. For the past century, Our thinking about water management has been dominated by one image, the wall. We build higher levees, stronger seawalls, giant dams. We call it gray infrastructure, a system of concrete and steel, designed to subdue and push back nature. It is a philosophy of separation. We are on this side, and the water is on the other. But disasters like Katrina and flash floods like the one in Texas have shown the limits of that philosophy. Any wall can eventually break, and when it breaks, the devastation is even more terrible. We are realizing that the more we try to fight nature, the more we seem to put ourselves in more dangerous situations. So, if gray walls are no longer the answer, where must we look? The answer, perhaps, lies in a different color, green. Around the world, a quiet revolution is taking place in hydroengineering, a shift from gray infrastructure to green infrastructure. The core idea is simple. Instead of trying to fight nature, learn from it and work with it. Instead of building a stronger wall, build a bigger sponge. Let's talk about wetlands, mangrove forests, riverside meadows, swamps. For centuries, we have viewed them as useless lands. We filled them in to build cities. For agriculture, we didn't realize that they are the most effective flood control systems that nature has spent millions of years perfecting. Imagine a wetland as a giant sponge. When a heavy rain falls or a river rises, this sponge will slowly absorb that excess water. The water doesn't rush to one place but is spread out over a large area. The roots of plants, grasses, and layers of sediment act as a natural filter, slowing the flow, reducing its power, and allowing the water time to slowly seep into the ground. It doesn't just prevent floods, it also recharges groundwater, filters pollutants, and creates a rich habitat for countless species. Compare that to a concrete channel. The water has only one way to go, to flow as fast as possible downstream, carrying with it all its destructive power. Realizing this, many cities and countries are starting a reverse process, not filling in wetlands, but restoring them. They are giving space back to nature, removing unnecessary levees, and allowing rivers to breathe again. And this sponge philosophy is not just limited to rural areas. It is being applied right in the heart of cities. The concept of sponge cities is becoming a progressive urban planning trend. Join me for a walk in such a city. The sidewalks are not paved with solid concrete. They are paved with permeable bricks, allowing rainwater to seep directly into the soil below. Parking lots are covered with a layer of gravel or grass, instead of asphalt. On the roofs of tall buildings are green roofs, small gardens that not only cool the building but can also retain a significant amount of rainwater. Public parks are designed to be slightly lower, so they can become temporary reservoirs during heavy rains. It is a city that no longer sees rainwater as an enemy to be quickly flushed away through sewers. It sees rainwater as a precious resource to be retained, absorbed, and reused. A city that learns to breathe with the rhythm of the rains. Perhaps nowhere in the world demonstrates this radical shift in thinking more clearly than in the Netherlands, a country where more than a quarter of the land is below sea level. A nation whose identity has been shaped by a 1,000-year war against the sea. Their famous saying is, God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. They are masters of building dikes, but in the 1990s, 2 major floods on the Rhine and Meuse rivers nearly caused a national disaster. Hundreds of thousands had to be evacuated, and the Dutch realized one thing: they couldn't just keep building higher dikes. It was an arms race with nature that they could never win. And they made a revolutionary decision. They launched a program called Room for the River. Its philosophy was the complete opposite of what they had done for centuries. Instead of trying to force the river into a narrower space, they decided to give it more room. They carried out more than 30 projects across the country, They moved dikes further inland. They dug secondary channels for the water to escape during flood season. They lowered the floodplains so they could hold more water. They shifted from a confrontation to a negotiation with the river. They said to the river, "We will give you back some of the space we took. In return, please do not submerge our cities." And it worked. The Room for the River program not only made the Netherlands safer from floods, but it also created new nature areas, recreational spaces for the people, and improved the river ecosystems. It was a victory of wisdom over brute force. This change is not just happening at the national level. It is happening in every community, in every home. People are learning to build resilient houses. Houses raised on stilts in coastal areas. Houses with flood vents on the first floor, allowing water to flow through instead of destroying the structure. Houses with electrical and air conditioning systems placed on higher floors. All of this shows a profound shift in consciousness. Humans are beginning to understand that we are not the masters of this planet. We are just a part of it, and our existence depends on our ability to live in harmony with its laws. We began this journey with the sound of the night rain, a sound that carried both peace and threat. We have passed through the painful memory of the Great Flood of 1927, witnessed the hubris of concrete structures and their collapse in Hurricane Katrina. We have seen the new fury of the sky and the Texas flood, and felt the price paid by the people in the invisible financial flood. It has been a long and dark journey, but at the end of the road, there seems to be a light, the light of change, of new ideas, of a wiser philosophy. So, after all, what is the greatest lesson that the water teaches us? Is it about the power of confrontation, of ever higher walls? Or is it about the wisdom of adaptation, of finding a way to bend and live with the flow? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. Your sharing is an indispensable part of the Sleepless Mind community. If you feel connected to journeys like this, a like and a subscribe to the channel would be the greatest encouragement for us to continue exploring together in the long nights to come. Now, listen to the rain again. Perhaps, now, you will hear something different in it. Not just peace, not just a threat, but a dialogue, a constant invitation from nature, inviting us to learn to listen and to understand. Thank you for staying awake with Sleepless Mind. Sleep well. The blind spot of procrastination. In the final part of our previous journey, we were searching for rays of hope. We talked about sponge cities, about restored wetlands, about the Dutch philosophy of making room for the river. We saw that, technically and conceptually, humans have solutions to live more harmoniously with nature, but that raises a final, perhaps most difficult, question. If we have the answers, why don't we act? Why, knowing full well about climate change, do we continue to build concrete cities? Why, having witnessed horrific disasters, do we still hesitate to invest in warning systems? Why, knowing the risks, do people still flock to live in the most vulnerable areas? Tonight, our journey will not go outside anymore. We will not look at the rivers or the sky. We will enter a territory far more complex and unpredictable, the territory of the human mind. We will talk about the ghosts that come not from the past, but from the very way we think. We will talk about the blind spots, the cognitive biases, the invisible psychological traps that have been and are still preventing us from saving ourselves. Let's start with a very ordinary story. Imagine a young couple, after years of saving, finally finding their dream home. It's in a quiet suburb, with a large yard for the kids to play in, and at the end of the garden, a picturesque little stream flows by. The price is also very reasonable, much cheaper than other places. When signing the contract, the real estate agent might glance over a map and say, "Ah, This area is in a 100-year floodplain, so you'll need to buy flood insurance. The couple looks at each other. A 100-year floodplain? That sounds very distant. A future neighbor, when they came to view the house, had cheerfully said, "Oh, I've lived here for 40 years. Never seen a real flood. This stream is very gentle." And so, they decide. They look at the gentle stream. They look at the green lawn. They look at their children's smiles. They don't look at the map. They don't look at the statistics. They buy the house. They bet their future on the peace of the present. Why? The answer lies in one of the most powerful psychological defense mechanisms in humans, optimism bias. This is not a flaw. It is part of the reason the human species has survived and thrived. Every morning, we wake up with an unconscious belief that today will be a good day, that accidents won't happen to us, that we will live long and healthy lives. Without that optimism, we would be paralyzed by the fear of the countless risks that surround us. But the very mechanism that helps us survive the day becomes a deadly blind spot when facing long-term risks. We have a deep-seated belief that bad things happen to other people. Not to me. Floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, they are stories on the evening news. Not something that will happen to our house, to our family. Optimism bias is reinforced by its twin sibling, amnesia bias, or recency bias. Human memory, especially collective memory, is like writing on sand. A wave of time can easily wash it all away. We tend to react very strongly to what has just happened. After a major flood, people will worry, the government will hold emergency meetings, and preventive measures will be proposed. But then a year passes, 5 years, 20 years, in peace. The memory of the muddy red water fades. The risk no longer feels urgent. Other priorities emerge, the economy, jobs, elections, and then we act as if the threat no longer exists. That is exactly what happened in Texas. Decades without a catastrophic flash flood of that scale created an illusion of safety. Even as scientists repeatedly warned that the risk was growing due to climate change and urban development. And when a person decides to buy a house in a dangerous area, a third mechanism is activated to protect them from anxiety, cognitive dissonance. It is the psychological discomfort of holding two completely contradictory thoughts. This is a dangerous place, and I have chosen this place to build my home. To resolve that conflict, our mind will find ways to rationalize. We will tell ourselves, it probably won't be that bad. Technology is modern now. The government will warn us if anything happens. Or people have lived here their whole lives and been fine. We distort our perception of risk to fit the decision we have already made. An individual with these biases is being subjective, but when an entire political system, an entire culture shares these biases, it becomes policy. Let's look again at the story of the Texas way that the Guardian's article described. The rejection of Bill HB 13 for a siren system was not just a decision about money. It was a perfect manifestation of these cognitive biases at the macro level. Optimism bias. Our state is strong. We have always overcome natural disasters. No disaster big enough will happen anytime soon. Recency bias. Our immediate priorities are cutting taxes, attracting investment, creating jobs. Spending money on a warning system for a distant risk can wait. Cognitive dissonance. We are a state that supports small government and free enterprise. Spending on large-scale disaster prevention programs goes against our philosophy. Therefore, perhaps the threat isn't really as big as the scientists say. And so, a tragic cycle is formed, a cycle of panic and neglect. A disaster strikes, the media swarms in, the public is shocked and outraged. Politicians visit the scene, wearing emergency agency jackets, promising to do everything, that this will never be allowed to happen again. Then a few months pass. The cameras have left. Public attention moves on to another crisis. The promises are delayed. Prevention bills are shelved in committees. The budget is cut to be spent on more urgent things. And then, everything falls silent again until the next storm. The cycle begins anew. How do we break this cycle? How do we fight the blind spots in our own minds? The answer is not simple, but it is not impossible. It requires a change from both the system and the individual. First is to make the risk visible and impossible to ignore. Our biases thrive in abstraction. We need tools to turn cold statistics into a reality we can feel. Instead of complex flood risk maps that only engineers can understand, why not have simple signs in public areas, with a red line in the words, "In a 100-year flood, the water will reach here"? Why not develop augmented reality apps that allow home buyers to hold up their phone and see what their future home would look like underwater? Second is to change the economic incentives. People can ignore warnings, but it is very difficult to ignore their wallets. The Risk Rating 2.0 flood insurance system, despite its social problems, is essentially trying to do this by forcing people to pay a price that reflects the true risk. It breaks cognitive dissonance. You cannot tell yourself this place is safe when your monthly insurance bill says otherwise. And finally, most importantly, is to build a culture of preparedness. The biggest change doesn't come from a law, but from a shift in the general consciousness of society. It needs to be incorporated into education. We need to teach our children about climate change, about disaster risks, not to spread fear, but to equip them with knowledge and critical thinking. Preparing an emergency kit, knowing the evacuation routes in one's neighborhood, needs to become as normal and responsible as buckling up in a car. And in the end, after a long journey through besieged cities, through lonely laboratories, through firestorms and invisible fears, we realize that this story is not a call for fear. Fear, after all, is just a prison. It paralyzes us. It slams shut the doors of thought. No, this is a different kind of call. A call for awareness and preparation. But when I say the word preparation, what does your mind perhaps envision? Cellars filled with canned goods? Complex evacuation plans? No, the preparation we truly need, the only preparation that can face an ever-changing enemy, is not a physical preparation, it is a mental preparation. The empire of bacteria, as we've said, never sleeps. It is always evolving, always searching for weaknesses in our defense systems. And after all that we've seen, perhaps you would agree with me that the greatest weakness of the human empire does not lie in technology or biology. It lies here, in the very way we treat each other, and in the way we treat the truth. Perhaps, the best preparation for the next nightmare is not to stockpile goods, but to cultivate wisdom. The night is late. I know these questions are not easy to answer. They require us to look deep within ourselves, into the society we live in. They might make you feel small, helpless, but I believe that the very act of daring to sit here together in the night, facing these uncomfortable questions, is the first step of preparation. Thank you for taking the time to ponder with me. May you have a peaceful sleep, and wake up tomorrow with a clearer mind. You've crossed the story. You felt every pulse in the dark, and I was there with you, quietly, always. That's why I left behind one last thing, not to explain, not to impress, just to stay with you a little longer. A song I chose with care, as if tucking you in from across time and space. So go on, lay back, the music knows where to take you. you're still here, then you're something rare. Not many stay this long. So, thank you for choosing to stay. I'm here too, still awake, surrounded by the quiet glow of my editing screen, shaping the next stories just for you. If there's anything you want to leave behind, a whisper, a suggestion, even just a symbol, drop it in the comments, because maybe tomorrow night you'll hear yourself echoed in a story that's never been told before. still here, even now? I have a feeling part of you is still wandering somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming. I know that feeling well because I'm still awake with you. In a quiet room, I'm gently laying out layers of sound, each breath, each beat, preparing the next journey we'll take together. If you're still listening, leave me a sign. Let me know how you're feeling, or just where you are in this vast world. Because right now, in this stillness, you are not alone. You're still there, aren't you? I can't see you, but I can feel you. Like a soft signal pulsing across the silence. Over here, I'm still working, refining layers of sound, rewriting fragments of voice, building the landscape for our next adventure. One that you might inspire. If an idea comes to you, share it with me. Comment below. A theme, a memory, a strange dream. I read every word because I never tell these stories alone. I tell them with you.